Okay, hello Mr. Hartigan. I myself am from Limerick, so is there anything you can tell me about the history of the city itself? Anything that sticks out in your mind?
Well, I suppose apart from the obvious things about the history of Limerick, it's always been known as the city of the broken treaties as such. But one of the things that's most important about Limerick is the effect that the River Shannon has had upon it, and the fact that because of the River Shannon and has been provided a roadway to the rest of the world in terms of trade, we also became known as the city of the merchant princes. People like Spates, Mahons, Boyds, all set up business here in Limerick, and traded not just alone within the locality but outside of the city as well. So Boyds was an area that set up in 1848 in William Street in Limerick. It started from very, very small beginnings in a building that was actually 5 floors high at the time, which would have been very big at that time, and extended from William Street down into Denmark Street alongside where St. Michael's churches at the other side of it. It was a new type of business to be set up in Limerick at that time, insofar as it dealt with a number of different areas, which was they had a chemist department, a paint department, seeds department, hardware, and farm implements for the farming communities. It also had a grocery section, which would have been the forerunner of the supermarket at that time, and that they would mainly have supplied the farming community surrounding Limerick City, rather than the internal rural population, because of the type of products that they were selling wouldn't have been what the rural population would have been looking for.
Oh, I see. And you worked in Boyd's yourself. And what age were you when you started working in the department store?
Well, my first involvement with Boyd's was as a young fellow when I was going to secondary school in the Christian Brothers School. I would have got a summer job there at that particular time, and the first year that I worked there for 2 years during the summer months. The first time I worked in the chemist department, and my job there was as a porter. I used to go up and in the mornings I'd be given a list of what stuff needed to be packed up onto the shelves downstairs, and I'd go up to the storeroom overhead with a big wheelbarrow, and I'd wheel it down to these big iron gates where there was a lift inside that you'd have to pull it back, and you'd wheel your wheelbarrow in, bring it upstairs, and go to the different sections in the storeroom and take out all the different products that were needed to restock the shelf to a certain level for the day's taking.
And I was told that you worked your way up to senior management. Was this a long process, or how many years before?
Well, you see, that was the first year that I worked there,
yeah.
And I was only in secondary school there at that particular time. The following year, then I worked in the office inside there, but my job was as basically taking the invoices that were going around to all the places in town that were buying stuff off of Boyd's,
yeah.
Because they had a wholesale business as well as a retail business, and I'd go around and on a bicycle and deliver them all the envelopes in with all the invoices on it. So that was my job in the second year. But years later I got a job working there. At that time I had finished my leaving cert, and I was working originally I had been working in Shannon Airport, where I got my training to work as as an accounts person, and I worked my way up to being the accountant in the company that I was in Shannon Airport. And then my father fell ill, and I when he was ill, I worked he had a sports store and a public house at the top of William Street, and I worked there for a while for him. I took over his business for a while, and then a position came up in Boyd's where they were looking for an accountant, and I applied for the job, and I became the first person that was not Church of Ireland to get a job as the accountant in Boyd's.
Okay.
Because prior to that, Boyd's had a stipulation in their Memorandum and Articles of Association that a Catholic could not become a director of the company, and also there was another problem there where people that were doing the job in Boyd's, if you were a Catholic you were on one rate, and if you were doing the same job and you were a Protestant you were on a higher rate. So there was that kind of a discrimination there at the time.
And was Boyd's run by an English family or Irish?
Well, I supposed to be Anglo-Irish family, but they would have been of originally the Holiday family that took over Boyd's from the original family that owned it would have been the Unionist councillors in the city council here, or the corporation as it was called at that time, and they had just certain views as to how things should be done in that, and even up to the 1960s they were still running along those lines, as such that they had this division between themselves and the general population as such.
I see. And what was work life like with regards to human relations in Boyd's? Was it?
Relations were generally very good. People kind of accepted that that's the way things were at that time. But what changed it was, I suppose, Irish entry into the EC was one of the things that changed it. That people started looking for better jobs, better paid jobs, as well as more industry came in, and people started moving off to work in Shannon Airport, where they were getting better pay, and they were not prepared to accept anymore the fact that because you were a Catholic you got one rate of pay, and because you were a Protestant you got a higher rate of pay. So that was one of the things that were beginning to change it. Irish membership of the EEC also changed it in so far as it changed the nature of the business that they were doing, because up to then they used to sell small farm items, but when we joined the EEC, what happened was that there was grants being made available to farmers to buy big machinery as such, and Boyd's decided to go into selling that type of bigger machinery than they had been selling previously, and so farmers were coming in from all over Munster into Boyd's to buy their tractors as such. Now that was not situated in Boyd's and William Street. That was centred in they had another section there in Ellen Street, where there's a car park is there now today, but at that time they had all their farm equipment inside there, and so there was a huge business going on inside there, and that was bringing them more and more into line with what was happening in the modern world outside. And the conflict, the tension there was that most of the management in Boyd's were finding it difficult to to deal with the way that their business was changing, and were not modernising fast enough or thinking fast enough to see that things were going to change again after that. But at that time as well, you had some of the businesses, some of the departments that they had inside there. They had a grocery store inside there, which was the forerunner of what was the supermarket. But it was a case that you came in and you purchased your stuff over the counter, and you either had it delivered to you in the Boyd's van, or you took it out yourself and from Boyd's yourself. So it would come out in big boxes. You'd have to pack the box of groceries for the whoever was buying. So they might buy their whole week's supply of groceries inside there, but the rates that they would have been charging would be the rates of a corner shop, which wouldn't have been the supermarket rate.
Yeah.
And at that time, people like Roach's Stores here in town, they opened a supermarket of their own downstairs, and they were charging supermarket rates. And you had another grocery store across the way from it, I think it was called Goodwin's, as far as I can remember, or Goodall's or Goodwin's, I'm not altogether sure what it was. And they had a supermarket as well. And of course, there was a bus stop right outside Boyd's, and working people would get the bus to go to Rappan or Jamesbury or South Hill or Garryowen from outside Boyd's. So they weren't coming in to buy their groceries in Boyd's, but they went out to Roach's Stores, or they were going to some of the other supermarkets that had opened up in the centre of town. And so the end result is that the grocery department inside Boyd's started to become less and less.
Because it wasn't competitive.
Because it wasn't competitive. And then the other products that Boyd's would have been selling at the time would have been very high class products. Like they sold a huge section inside there that sold Waterford cut glass. Then another section there that dealt with pottery, and it was very high class pottery. It used to come down from Northern Ireland, and a place called the Carlisle Pottery. Very expensive lines. So they had a huge population gathering outside their doors to get on the bus, not coming in to buy their products because they couldn't afford them. And at the same time, they were moving with
the times,
with what people wanted. They should have changed their business to make sure that they were catering for the customer outside the door. So they didn't do that, and it eventually led to the fact that the amount of business that Boyd's was doing in comparison with some of the other places in town was less and less because of it. Now the other thing was that the management that was in there, they were mainly people that had lived here in the Limerick area for years. They were old Protestant families, and they had a certain view of the world as it was outside there, and invariably you didn't get a job inside there if there was a Catholic and a Protestant going for the same job, let's say in management. And because you were a Protestant, no matter what your qualifications, you were more likely going to get the management position inside there. But there was less and less people available for them to employ, and more of the general population who were becoming more and more qualified to do the job. So that was one of the things that actually changed the nature of Boyd's at the time, and that was possibly one of the things that managed to change maybe it was part of his downfall as well, because when other people came in, they didn't take the same care that the old management had inside there as well. But it certainly caused certain frictions between people in there.
And Boyd's closed in 1993. What impact do you think it had on the city, if any, at that stage? Obviously, the people who were employed there, but the greater public as well.
Well, yeah. Well, when Boyd's closed in '93, no, I had left Boyd's. Well, at that stage, I had gone on to do other things. I always regretted leaving Boyd's, because the next job that I went on to was to work for William O'Brien Waste Disposal and Plant Hire, and I went there because I was getting more money at the time, and at the same time I had been offered at the time when I was leaving the company's secretary's position and a seat on the board of management at that time, which was a huge step for Boyd's to be taken. The first Catholic director that Boyd's had at the time was a man called Eddie Daunt, and the reason that they took him on to do the job is because they couldn't find somebody in the Church of Ireland to actually take on the position when that position became available. But I became the first Catholic person to do the accounts, and effectively the reason I know what was in the Memorandum of Articles of Association is because the managing director there at the time was a man called Bill Cheatley, and he gave me the Memorandum of Articles to read when I was doing the accounts in there, and asked me to take on the position initially as assistant company secretary to himself. In other words, to do the work that he was doing, because he was managing director and he was supposed to be the company secretary as well at the time. And I pointed out to him the difficulty that even though they had appointed Eddie Daunt, they hadn't changed their Memorandum and Articles of Association. And he says, well, we're going to have to change that. We're living in a different world, as he said at the time. You know, no, he was from Northern Ireland, and he couldn't understand the people of his own faith down here in Limerick. He couldn't understand that he always felt that they were holding back Boys, and he was the man also that purchased the land above in Galvone. Now I don't know if you know where Galvone is. No. Do you know where Krups used to be in Limerick? No. Okay, it's just off the corner of the South Hill area of Limerick.
Yeah.
And there was a big plot of land there which belonged to an old Protestant family called the Toppins, who were landlords in that area, and they had sold on the land first of all to Krups, who had set up a factory there, and then land across the way from that which they had sold to Boyd's. And the intention had been to open a supermarket in that area. And Bill Cheatley's view was that everybody else was going towards the supermarket thing at that time, this new idea of buying in bulk, selling cheap, and supplying as many people as possible. Now, he had come down from Northern Ireland, and one of the things that he wanted to do was to modernise Boyd's. And he saw first of all, that there was people outside the door that were coming into Boyd's, and the first question he asked is, where are they going? And when he found out that they were going up to South Hill, was just after being built, you had the old areas of Rappan and Janesborough, and you had Weston across the way from that, all council estates, and only corner shops there. So what he had wanted to do was to set up a supermarket that would have serviced people in that area, and that would have had Boyd's name on it. So something like Ben Dunn had done roughly around that time as well. because Ben Dunn had done exactly what he was thinking of doing. And there was a lot of infighting that had gone on in the board of management about that, and eventually he ended up selling the land on because he missed the opportunity. The company missed the opportunity to set up a supermarket. But to answer your question as to what effect it had on Boyd's had employed in Limerick City alone approximately 130 people between the store in William Street and the farm place that they had across in Ellen Street. There was 130 people working there. There was another 40 people working in Clonmel, and there was another 20 people working in Esperos in Mallow. So there were huge employers for that time in Limerick City, and when it eventually went, they were only applying something like 15 people in Boyd's. So I left Boyd's in 1980, so between 1980 and 1993 the business deteriorated out of all proportion, and the most part of that was because things had moved on around them. The supermarket became a bigger thing, and initially the supermarkets were all placed in the centre of Limerick, and then after that they started being placed outside on the outskirts of the city. So you had them outside in the Jetland on the Ennis Road, and you had the Parkway on the other side of the town, and that. So all of that was changing as such, and modern Irish society was changing dramatically as well. So by the time it actually closed down, I think that it had run a course as such. But from the point of view of, I suppose, remembering old Limerick and the shops that were in old Limerick, and the fact that it was always this landmark in Limerick, that everybody knew where Boyd's was, the same as you knew where Todd's was and you knew where Roach's stores were, and that. When Boyd's left in Limerick, it left a huge void as far as the city was concerned. Now, I suppose other things had happened at that time as well. We had a huge industry came into Limerick, which was the one out there in the Castle Troy, where the man, what's his name, Harima, was kidnapped in the 1970s by the IRA, and they employed a lot of people in Limerick at the time. So they would have been employing up to 1,000 people in the city at the time. But there was a lot of unrest there as well, a lot of labour unrest, and that had come and gone, and Boyd's was still there. You had other places that opened up as well. You had Wang, which was a computer place that had opened up and had closed down, and Boyd's was still there, you know. Yeah. So I mean, it lasted a long time, but what was happening all around them was that the type of business that we were doing was changing, and Boyd's never managed to change with it, you know. And eventually what they started doing was they started closing down. They started selling off portions of Boyd's and developing like a shopping mall, like you have down there in Arthur's Quay. So what had been the old original Boyd's was turning into little shops along the way, and they only had a small section inside there employing 15 people of their own. They took one of the units that they developed inside there. But when I was working there, you had a basement section which was covered in stores, and which ran out into an area where the lorries would come into at the back of it, and they would load up stuff for it to be delivered off to farmers and shops all around the area. And you had two floors overhead the shopping area, which were all storerooms as well. I mean, you had funny things that happened inside there. That the staff were always playing jokes on one another. One of the things that happened to me when I went in there, I was, I suppose, maybe 15 or 16 when I took on my first job inside there, and I was working in the chemist department, and some fella decided to play a joke on me one day, and the joke was that he gave me an order and he told me to go up to Orange the Wire. Now, I should have known straight away that Orange the Wire didn't supply drugs or what would you call it, cosmetics or anything else like that. But he gave me this order to go up to Orange the Wire, and I just took the order and got on my bicycle and cycled straight up and went in, and I handed the order across to the poor man, salesman across the way, and he looked at the order and he burst out into hysterics laughing. He thought it was the funniest thing. Now, this is about 1963 or so, and the order was for a nail for a glass contraceptive. Was what he had down on the order. And of course, at 13 or 14 years of age, I didn't know what a contraceptive was, but he sent me back down anyway packing, and of course I came in still not knowing what the joke was or anything else like that. And of course the whole news had gone around the whole of Boyds on this. So there were always there was always something going on inside there. Then there was another incident where, well, I suppose there was a very serious accident that happened inside Boyds where there was a man killed. Well before I had worked there, but I had nearly a very, very similar accident there myself as a result of it. What it was, I don't know if you ever, the lifts that you have today, the elevators that you have today, were very different then, because there was a big iron gate in front of them. You might have seen them in films and that,
yeah.
And you pull them across and you step onto this, basically a box that brings you up and down. But I used to have to bring this cart down to the lift, put it onto it, and then go up to get stuff for the chemist department on it. But the lift often had a mind of its own, and so that you open it, it wasn't supposed to move when the door was open. And the lift had a mind of its own. I had the cart halfway in and halfway out when the lift took off, and I ended up trying to hold on to the cart as it was going up, and of course it jammed between the top of the lift and the floor of the lift that was going up, and I was left there hanging out of it, and somebody ran down and managed to pull me down off the thing, because I was a very small fella at the time, like sort of, and I was left hanging out of this thing. And he then proceeded to tell me that I was very, very lucky, because about 10 or 15 years before that, something had happened to somebody different, and he stuck his head in and he was actually decapitated, you know. So like things like that kind of happened with inside there, because a lot of the equipment was old and they didn't modernise it. I think that the first time that they modernised it, I was there, and that was as a result of a fire. There was a fire there which burned out mainly the office area, as far as I can remember, at the back. And when it burned it out, they decided to revamp the offices inside there afterwards. And that was the first modernisation that took in. I think they took away the old lift and they put in a new lift there at that time as well. But when I had gone in there, they had this old bookkeeping system. Now, I don't know if you know anything about bookkeeping, if you've done anything with debits and credits or anything else like that.
Oh yeah, I have a small bit of understanding.
Yeah, well, everything was done in terms of the old T section. You know, you the debits on one side and the credits on the other side.
Yes.
And so the ledger, because they accounted for every sale, everything that was sold inside there was a record of it, and everything was done in pounds, shillings, and pence. Now, that was the old sterling system as such, before they brought in decimalisation, and you had 12 pennies in a shilling, 20 shillings in a pound, as such. So everything was done with three sections: pounds, shillings, and pence. And it was done in the most beautiful writing that I think, what's it called, calligraphy, is that the
yeah.
And it must have taken ages for to do it, because everything was balanced to the penny, literally to the penny. They wouldn't write down the answer unless they knew that the answer was right. So they'd check it 3 or 4 times before they'd write it down, and they'd write it down in this most beautiful writing as such. But when the fire happened inside Boyd's, those ledgers were saved because they had been locked away into the safe for the night. Now, I remember that the ledger was about that high, so you'd have to go and find each account and write in your pounds, shillings, and pence into it. But of course, when I went in there, everything had changed to decimalisation, and when I saw the old ledger inside there, I said, you know, it must be taking you ages to get your accounts done. And I was explained, yes, it does. We're nearly 3 months in arrears in getting the accounts done, because everything had to be written so perfectly out. Like, I mean, they took it down rough, and then there was somebody inside, nearly a draftsman, that was writing this beautiful writing to get everything done in this beautiful hand script before they would produce a set of accounts. So management decisions were always late of what was happening. And I remember saying to him, I can produce a set of accounts within 2 weeks of the end of a month if you allow me to change the ledgering system. And your man looked at me and says, you can't do that, you couldn't do that as such. Now, at that time it wasn't computerised or anything else like that, but I had got my training inside in Shannon Airport, where we were meeting, I suppose, the modern world a little bit earlier. We were quicker to decimalize. We were dealing with foreign currencies outside there, because we were doing a lot of business with England and with Germany and the Middle East even as such. So we were decimalised, and we used to convert the decimal back into pounds, shillings, and pence over here. So if we were dealing in Dutch marks in Germany, we'd have to convert that to pounds, shillings, and pence over here. So it was very easy for us to go decimal at the time. But I had got a training where the ledgering system was based on what we called an extended trial balance. And instead of putting down everything in terms of debiting on the left hand side and crediting on the right hand side, but just divide on it. We did everything in terms of black and red, so we'd have a black biro and a red biro, and it meant that instead of having 20 different sales accounts, we could put our 20 sales accounts on one sheet. As such, so we could get to the answers very much quicker than they could. So I introduced that inside Boyd's, and they thought it was, they couldn't believe that they could get their figures within 2 weeks at the end of the month at a time. So in a way I became a great fella inside there, because suddenly they had somebody that could tell them what the answer was, what the sales were, what the purchases were, what the gross margin was within 2 weeks at the end of the month. But when they had the fire, William Sheatley wanted to throw these ledgers out on in the bin. He didn't see the point of them. As far as he was concerned, he had to hold them for 5 years, and once the 5 years was up, 6 years, once that period was up, it was of no more value to him as such. But even at that time I used to be saying to him, but you have to keep those, they're of historic value as such. And I managed to get a commitment of him that he would take them home. Now, I wanted to give them to Jim Kenny in town here at the time, but Jim Kenny would have been far left politics to him, and he wouldn't give them to him. But I managed to tell him that he would take them home and keep them. And now whether his family, he's dead now since, whether his family have kept them or not, but I think it would be great if they could be traced as such, because it gives you a flavour of the way things were done at the time, and how precise they were, and everything had to be absolutely bang on in their work. Otherwise you were out of a job if you didn't get your answers right. You didn't, if you were out by a penny, they'd be searching for the penny, as such. But that was one of the things that they had. But William Sheatley, he was very different in his approach to, let's say, the Holliday family. The Holliday family would have been an old unionist family that have had very strict lines as dividing between the ordinary people and themselves. They regarded themselves basically as being better than everybody else, but at the same time they'd go out of their way to help you as well. Like if somebody was in trouble, if somebody had a bereavement or an illness or something like that, they'd always, come down to see you, or to make sure that you were all right. And they always had everybody had to join it. There was a sick policy inside there, where you paid into a scheme, and if you were out sick, you effectively got your wages through the...
Oh, I think I heard about this with regards to ranks. Everyone else pays a tax out of their wages. And to help people out. So you always got paid for it. Now I remember my wife's sister-in-law, her father worked in Boyd's. He was a porter in Boyd's, and he got cancer, and he was out of work for the best part, nearly a year and a half. He was dying with cancer. But initially he used to come in and collect his money as such, and then after a while he was going downhill and down the whole time. And I said to my wife one day, look, I said, I'll get the money from him and I'll bring it up to house to him every Friday night. Yeah. So he wasn't coming in. I used to take the form with me, and I'd get the sign for the form when I was above there, and then I'd have it in work the next day. And it became common knowledge that I was bringing the money up to George Ingalls, was his name, at it, and he'll cheaply call me and he wanted to know why I was bringing up money to this man. Why couldn't he come in and collect it himself? And I said, look, he's very sick. He's not really able to come and collect it, and his wife isn't too well either. Okay. So I said, I've decided that I would do that for him. And he said, yeah, but he said, I said, I don't have any problem with it. He said, but is this taking you out of your way? And I said, no. I said, it's not. I said, I know the man personally. I said, and I think that there's something should be done. He said, well, fair play to you. He said like that. You know, they were very compassionate about that. But what he was questioning was I taking the money myself? Oh. Right. This is what, you know, that have got kind of concerned that why was I actually taking the money and going out? Was I using it as a kind of a scam for myself, and that it wasn't getting to the man? So in that way, that have been very good to their staff. But on the other side of that, then they'd have been a little bit humorless about other things as well. They had this policy. When I was doing the accounts, I'd always take into consideration that there was always pilferage going on. Not necessarily amongst the staff, but people coming in and shoplifting inside there. So you do your accounts and you do your stock, and you'd always take into consideration a little adjustment for possible pilfering. Yeah. But they also had a scheme there that they'd check up on the staff to make sure that the staff weren't pilfering. And what they did was they'd hire a private company to come in and purchase products off of them inside the shop. And once they be purchasing the products, the person that was actually buying it would be checking to see what the staff member was doing, and making sure that they were given the right change, that they weren't missing out on the products, and then putting the money into their own pockets and that. So what you do is that they do their business, and then every now and then you'll get a box come back in. It would be delivered back in with the same products that were sold, and it would come into my office, and then the managing director would come in and he'd open it up and he'd look at the report. There'd always be a report, an invoice from the company that they were buying from, but a report to say, you know, what had happened that they think. So if somebody was pilfering in any way whatsoever, they'd know straight away. And one day there was these things came in, and Cheatley opened the thing, and his face went white. And I was looking at it, his face went white, because it was one of their own. There was actually maybe that's the wrong term to be using, one of their own as such, but it was he was church. He was a sales person inside there, and he was Church of Ireland, and his whole family had all worked inside in Boyd's. Some of them had moved on to work elsewhere, but there was a line of them going back over generations that had all worked inside in Boyd's, and he was the last of them inside there, and he was caught pilfering inside there, and they were scandalised by it, that
He was in a high esteem inside.
That they were of such high esteem. That things like that would upset them enormously, because they were so honest in their approach to everything, that when their own offended, they actually treated them harder than anybody else. You know, they wouldn't give them references. They wouldn't help them out in any way whatsoever. You know, but the other thing as well is that there was often friction between the staff and the management, and at that time, all over the country, you'd have strikes. Strikes used to occur once every month. Somebody would be on strike around the country, and whilst I was there was a strike which involved 4 travellers. What you had in boys was that you had about 125, 130 people working there, and you had 5 unions. And the unions that you had there, you had the Irish Transport and General Workers Union, you had the Distributive and General Workers Union, you had a union for the chemist that worked inside there. Then the chemist's assistant was in a different union, and then you had the travellers union. Now you had 4 travellers working inside Boyd's, and their job was to go out and basically sell on a wholesale basis to the shops around Limerick. So they were going out to places like Rathkeil and Bruff and Kilmallock and places like that, and they were selling what boys were buying in at a wholesale level. And when they go out on their journey, they'd have a route to follow as such, but they were allowed a meal when they were out travelling along the road. And one of the travellers had decided to write out his own meal receipt. So depending on where he was, whatever hotel or restaurant he'd go to, he had got docket books off of him. Somebody had given him the docket book for the receipt, and he used to write out his own receipts. And he'd have his sandwich and his cup of tea in the car and have his dinner when he went home that night. So, excuse me. But this was found out. Bill Sheatley, again, being the shrewd man that he was, he decided that he was going to investigate this, because the writing was all the same. It was different hotels and everything else like that, but the writing was all the same. So he called him in and he said, "Look," he said, "you're writing out your own receipts. You can't do that." And he told him not to do it anymore. But your man continued on the same thing as such. Now I think he got something like £3, £1 and 3 pence of an allowance for every meal. So if he spent £5, he was still only allowed £3, £1 and 3 pence. And the man was coming in with receipts for £5, and he was claiming these £3, £1 and 3 pence. So he regarded this as being part of his entitlement. And Sheatley was saying sort of, "No, it's not part of your entitlement. You actually have to physically have the meal. Otherwise, it's part of your wages, and that's taxable." Right? And the man continued, and eventually Sheatley, after a number of occasions, called him in eventually and said, "Look, enough is enough. If you do it again, I'm going to sack you." So the man just laughed at him and off he went. So he did it again the following week, and then Sheatley called me in and he said, "Look," he said,
do you have a look at those receipts there and let me know what you think is peculiar about them. So I looked at them and I knew straight away what he was saying. I said, well, they're all written by the same person. So I said, yeah, that's right. Now I'm going leaving this man go on Friday evening, and I'm telling him tonight. And I said to him at the time, look, I said, you're making a mistake. I said, there's a different way that you should go about doing this, because if you do it this way, what's going to happen is that you're going to have a big strike and nobody will pass it. He says, there's only 4 travellers, he said to me like that. And meaning that 4 travellers, they can't pick it.
Yeah.
They can't keep everybody else out. And I said, yes, I said, there's 4 travellers and 4 entrances into Boyd's. 2 here on William Street, 2 over on Dillon Street. I said, all they have to do is put a picket on each gate.
Yeah.
Nobody will pass the picket line. So he said, no, he said to me like that, you can't, no, they won't pass the picket line. And I said, no, he said, no, they'll pass the picket line. The staff will pass the picket line. And I said, no, they won't. And I said, I think what you should do is that you should call him in, you should tell him enough is enough. You should give him an opportunity to find work elsewhere, give him a good reference, and let him go. I said, but keep him until such time. Do it the easy way rather than the hard way. He said, no, I'm leaving him go. So I said to him, okay, I said, but if I come in here Monday morning, now, Mr. Cheatley, and there's a picket outside that door, I'm not passing the picket. And he said, but you're not a member of the union. Because I was supposed to be management.
Yeah.
Now, I had become a member of a union before I went into Boyd's, and what I was told when I was coming in is that I couldn't join the union. Now, I said, no, I won't join the union, but I never told him that I was already a member of the union. Yeah. And he said he was thinking because I was management that I'd cross the picket line. And I was saying, no, that I wouldn't pass the picket line. And I said to him at the time, I said, within a week you'll be asking me to try and sort this out. But I won't be able to sort it out if I pass the picket line. Because nobody would be prepared to listen to me.
Yeah.
So on the Monday morning I came up, and I'll never forget it, there was one traveller outside the main door to Boyd's that I would have used to come in, and all the staff outside the door, and they're walking up and down along the way. And I said to one of the lads, I said, is there anybody on the back entrance? And they said, oh yeah, there's another traveller on the back entrance. And I said, and there's one on each entrance over and the other. Yeah, he said like that. And I started exploiting it, you see. And I was standing outside when one of the other managers, of the, I think the hardware section, came up to me and he said, Dermot, when you cross in, all the managers will follow you in. He said like that, you see. And I said, I looked at him, I said, come here now, Mr. Connolly. I said, if you want to cross the picket line, I said, off you go and do it. I said, but don't be asking me to do your dirty work. You know, I said like that. I've never crossed the picket line. I'm not going to cross it now. I said like that, you see. And the peculiar thing is that one of the staff that was there that had got drunk previous Christmas Eve inside and was doing a little bit of messing inside there, had heard me saying to this, I had threatened to sack him if he didn't go home. I had sent him home on that Christmas Eve. Yeah. And he was refusing to go home, and I said, well, okay, I said, if you're not going to go home, I'll sack you.
Yeah.
I said like that. I said, but you're only causing problems inside here, because boys at that time would have been very, very at Christmas time would have been very busy.
Yeah.
And he said, no,
he went home, but he was very sour about it as such, and he didn't like me after that. But when he heard me saying to your man that I wasn't going to pass the picket line, that I was refusing to pass the picket line, and then none of the managers went in either. So the managers that would have gone in and would have been able to operate the tills for the week were waiting for me to cross it, and I wouldn't cross it. So they stayed out then as well. But by the end of the week, I had to help out with getting the. I got in touch with Frank Prendergast, who was a member. He was a trade union official with the transport union at the time, and it was on. Bill Chiltney had phoned me at home and asked me if I could help to resolve the issue, and I said, will you go along with my previous suggestion that we offer this man, we reinstate him back in his job and ask him to move on as soon as he gets something better. He says, yeah, I will. So I went down to Frank Prendergast and I explained what the situation was, and he managed to get all the unions together and they agreed to get the staff back to work on the following day. And the thing after that was that I ended up doing, whenever a dispute arose, even though I was in the accounts department as such, but I was invariably called in to try and sort out the discrepancies that were there then. But after that, the thing was that the pay wasn't great at the time, and I had a young family, and a position came up with William O'Brien Plantyre, and I applied for it, and I was offered the job at the time, and I went in to tell them that I had got a different position. Now at that time, Bill Chiltney was dying of cancer, and I'd been doing most of his work for a period of about 9 months prior to that. But when he heard that I was talking about leaving, he came in from his sick bed, I suppose, but he came in and he asked me to remain, and he offered me the same money that I was going for, and just the company secretary's position then straight away as well, and I decided that I had made a decision to move, and that I should
stick to
that decision, and I decided to move. But later on, I regretted it. I was raging about it afterwards in a way, because it was a great place in lots of ways to work in there,
Yep.
In some way. My father had worked in Rights in the 1940s during what became known here in this country as the emergency, but in England, of course, it was the Second World War, and during that time, De Valera had started off what was the Local Defence Forces, what it was called, but later on it became the FCA, and that was part of an initiative to protect the country in the event that we were invaded either by the British or the German forces during the Second World War. And my father worked inside there as I think it was some sort of a clerk in Rights, where they'd counted what was coming in and what was going out, and that sort of thing. And he would have been in charge of a gang of people moving in flour from one place to the other inside there. And De Valera's instruction was that anybody that
went off on manoeuvres with the LDF at that time, that their job was to be there for them when they came back. But ranks had a different policy, and their policy was that anybody that worked for ranks that went away and joined the British Army, their jobs were to be there for them when they came back. But my father, being, I suppose, very nationalist minded and very Republican minded, I suppose, went away and he joined the LDF, and he became a sergeant in the LDF at that time, and he went away on some manoeuvres that they had been on in, I think, down in Lahinch, some training exercises that they were on. But when he came back to work in ranks, he was let go from the job. He was sacked straight away, because even though he had reported that he was going away on these manoeuvres, that as far as they were concerned, he was absent without leave from the company, and he was let go from the job straight away. Now, I know that he was very, very bitter about that, and because he saw fellas that had joined the LDF at the time and then deserted and went away with the British Army, but they hadn't even gone with the away with the manoeuvres at the time. And I think partially his idea was that, why are people going away to fight with the old enemy, like at the time? But he was always very bitter about that, and I think it's something that a lot of people probably don't know about in the record of ranks at the time. Now, I know that my granduncle worked there in ranks as well, and he seemed to have worked in the accounts department or administration department there in some way or other, because he seemed to have got on very well at it, and he seemed to have some pension as a result of working in ranks. Now, for that particular time, I mean, he was an old man in the 1960s, 1950s, 1960s, when I remembered him, and he was retired at that stage from there. But my father always told me he had this good pension out of ranks. He just didn't have the old age pension; he had this pension out of ranks as well. And that's another issue that a lot of people, like my father-in-law, he had no pension out of ranks, as far as I know. I think he might have something very, very small out of there, but he worked as a labourer down there. And the other place then was the other man that I worked there as well then was my wife's brother-in-law, but he worked as a lorry driver there, and that was in the 1960s, 1970s. He seemed to have had I think conditions had changed an awful lot there at that particular time as well. It became known as a very good employer at that particular time, you know. So that was the only thing that I wanted to say about ranks and such.